it truly possible for video games to work in the same realm as live action, television, film, anything like that? Well, we're going to be discussing that today in the form of looking at Quantum Break and what happened with that game. Obviously, you might notice there's something slightly different about this video because you cannot see me. In my past videos, you could always see me. I'm just experimenting with something different to see if I can mix up my editing style, see what I enjoy. I will also say that this video is not just factual. There is definitely some of my opinion mixed in here. You're welcome to disagree with me, and you're welcome to let me know your own opinions because I'm really interested in hearing the debate. I've tried to be as balanced as possible and I wanted to include positives and negatives for the game throughout, but obviously my conclusion is very much skewed to my own opinions. If you enjoy this kind of content from me, please feel free to subscribe, and let's just get started. Firstly, we're going to look at Quantum Break. What is it? A brief history. I'm not going to talk too much about the narrative of the game overall, mostly because I think it's something you should experience yourself, and I don't want to have any spoilers throughout this video, and also because I really want to focus on the innovation in this game rather than the narrative of it. Quantum Break is a science fiction action-adventure third-person shooter developed by Remedy Entertainment, and it was published by Microsoft Studios. I'm going to give you the synopsis of the game rather than an in-depth analysis, just so you can make your own decisions and experience it yourself. When the game breaks, catastrophe becomes your playground. As the hero Jack Joyce, you'll fight your way through epic disasters that stutter back and forth in time. But surviving this unstable world and halting the end of time itself is only possible by mastering your new time powers. Remedy as a studio have made a series of successful games in their history, all the way from Max Payne to Alan Wake, and obviously more recently Control, which has allowed them to build a reputation with other publishers like Rockstar, Microsoft and Xbox. It is undeniable that the success of Max Payne and Alan Wake allowed for the budget they needed to make Quantum Break a reality. I feel like a smaller studio trying to achieve a similar thing would have struggled in terms of quality of the product, having done that without a budget. Remedy's first experimentation with transmedia ideas was mixing a video game and a television show, and that was in the Alan Wake saga. That was in his television show called Quantum Suicide. It was at this point that Microsoft were really keen to keep working with Remedy, but they didn't want to continue any of their old IPs and wanted to develop a new IP. Remedy, as an idea, wanted to mix a narrative, choice-based action game with an interactive television show, and this was obviously going to be a challenge. To make this work, they decided that time travel as a motif would be the best way to utilise both mediums. They decided that the focus of the game will be about changing past events and having impact on the story's future. They pitched this to Microsoft and it was all approved, and Sam Lake was cast as the director of the game, and he was also the director and writer of Alan Wake and Max. Greg Loudon became the narrative designer, and Ben Cato was the TV show's director. Pre-production for this game started in about 2011 with 100 people working on it, and it was largely built on DirectX 11. The game was written with the goal of making it believable, but it was also described as being complicated. So complicated that Loudon had to create a chart for the team so they could keep track of the story's progression, trying to integrate some elements of television into the game, so the two were not jarring next to each other. They attempted to keep the pacing and plot twists very similar to what a TV show would have generically, in the hopes that the plot would be unpredictable, but also fit nicely in with the TV show segments. At this point, there wasn't much of the narrative written. They kind of knew that they wanted it to be time travel based, and this would allow them to kind of distinguish past and future by using the television episodes as one or whatever, and the game as the other. The writers really wanted to include choice into the game, although I'm not going to be touching on those choices necessarily. I'm going to be telling you the general motif they used for that. They created something called junction points, and this is how they describe them itself. The junction power reveals two potential futures. Your diversions at each junction point will steer the stories of both the game and the live-action TV show. These also act as breaks in the acts of the narrative. So the game is split into sections, and in between each act and before each television episode, you would have a junction point. And in these junction points, you would play as the character Paul Serene, which is the antagonist of the game. And you're presented with a branching narrative point within the story that alters events, but without changing the overarching plot. They hope that these junction points would add to the replayability of the game and encourage people to experience it more than once. Overall, the game has 5 acts, 4 junction points, and 4 episodes. So it's all split. You do an act, a junction point, an episode, an action. You know what I mean? Yeah, there we go. According to Lake, it was designed to be a complete package, and the full experience was all of these 5 acts, these junction points, and the 4 episodes of television show that they'd made. You can skip the TV show if you want to, but it's advised that players don't if you don't want to miss crucial narrative points. Early in production, the TV show had a drastically different story to the narrative of the game, but they ended up scrapping this as they felt the nature of the two mediums would work better if they kind of echoed each other. They also really wanted to keep the game camera style and depth of field very similar to how they'd shot the TV show, in order for it to feel like a bit of a smoother transition between the two. The game obviously features time travel mechanics, allowing for the player to interact with time to take down enemies. It's a shooter, but there is lots of play there and moves and kind of powers you have. There are also some puzzles in the game to increase variety and change the pace. They also said they spent a lot of time on their AI, designing them to attack the player aggressively to encourage the player to use their abilities and not just hide behind cover. Quantum Break was officially announced on the 21st of May 2013, and the trailers were released. It was originally set to release in 2015, but then was delayed to 2016 to avoid competition with Microsoft's Halo 5 and Rise of the Tomb Raider. It was announced it was going to be released on the 6th of April 2016. The show aspect of the game, the TV show, was released separately and was not available in the retail edition in order to save disk space. As a result, Xbox One and Windows 10 users would have to stream the show, which seems a bit of an effort for a game, to be frank. It was originally an Xbox One exclusive, but they obviously decided to launch it for PC at the same time. Remedy ported it for the PC, and it was going to be released on the Windows Store, and it would require DirectX 12. Microsoft was criticised because people had bought it for the Xbox One and also bought Xbox Ones for the game because they'd been under the impression that it was an Xbox exclusive, and it wasn't communicated very clearly when they changed their mind and decided to put it on the PC as well. So people were a bit annoyed. In order to appease this, people who bought it on the Xbox One would also get a code for it on Windows 10. They also released a standalone PC version 2 later, and they distributed that through Steam in September 2016. This version was different to the Windows 10 version because Steam, this version actually supported Windows 10 and above, so it had much more compatibility with older computers. So that is a brief summary of the development of the game. Now we're going to be talking about what I thought of it and how successful it was in mixing television with video game. So yeah. So for this section of the game, I want to discuss different elements of the game, both positively and negatively, regardless of my personal opinion, to try and give you my overall and the best overall general reception of the game, both from myself and from other players, and discussing not only the game aspects, but how they interlink with each other. Before we get into the aspects of multimedia and other things in the game, I want to talk about the problems with the game itself, technically. As is often expected, the frame rate and resolution suffered on the console version of this title, but it was pretty bad. It had issues maintaining 30 FPS at 1080p, and it often ended up remaining at about 720p in order to maintain a steady FPS. However, there were also issues on the PC port too. Eurogamer said that they couldn't break 50 FPS on a 60Hz monitor, even when using a GTX Titan X. The game was also locked on the PC to 1080p at 30 FPS, which was supposed to create a smoother experience for people, but there was still an issue with frame rate jittering on the PC. It was also reported that there was no option to play the game in native 1080p, so gamers were actually being given a 720p upscaled version just like the Xbox One. This isn't great in and of itself, but when put next to the television show that can often be streamed without any lag or delay at all, the work they did to try and have them seamlessly fit together was slightly undone, especially considering the high production of the television segments. Honestly, there is not much I can say positively about this aspect. The edges were blurry, textures pop in and out, there are frame rate issues, and this is a massive disservice to the game. The game is beautiful and demanding, and it's badly optimized. The visual and the effects in the game are amazing. It's super cool, it's cinematically gorgeous, but it's ruined by technical issues plaguing the game, especially when you've bought it on the PC. It doesn't help that shooting segments and when you're using your powers, there are drops in frame rate, which causes, well, you just don't get to appreciate the beauty that they've clearly made within this title. There is one positive technical element I will talk about, and it's facial animation. I would say that this is pretty damn good for this era of gaming and when it was released, especially when compared to something like Mass Effect Andromeda. The main characters benefit mostly from this, and I think that is because there was a lot of effort put into creating the actors' models in the game and their animation, because obviously it was going to then be seen again they were going to be seen again as real life actors in the television segments, so they had to look similar. The emotional weight of the story is fantastically carried by both the acting and the animation. It was occasionally jarring to see a fantastic protagonist being animated so beautifully, interacting with a throwaway NPC who was kind of like made of Play-Doh. So there was a little bit of contrast, but obviously you'd expect the protagonist to have more effort put in. And I think they should definitely be commended on their facial animation in this game. I'm going to be talking about the writing, although I'm not going to be talking about the plot because I do not want to spoil anything. Spoiler free. So, best I can, I'm not going to spoil this game for you. The pacing of this game was criticised. They'd attempted to match the pacing and the plots of a television show within the game itself, and this did cause some problems. It was described by one journalist as cumbersome. Where Telltale Games had managed to capture audiences with games styled in the episodic television show motif, the attempt to do this alongside an actual television show episode proved more challenging. I believe this is because at least the narrative remains in one medium in the Telltale Games, whereas players have to suspend some disbelief within Quantum Break and have to accept the episodes as part of the playing experience, which actually pads on the runtime of the game without giving you the ability to play more of the game. The choices within the writing were even more obvious to be an illusion of choice. At the junction points of the game, you're given an A-B choice, so you get two options, and it also shows you the consequences, the brief overview of the two choices. It's not choice heavy, and I think that this is because they were juggling so much that they were trying to achieve that they had to sacrifice and give on something. But arguably, they definitely did include choices, and I also think that the fact that they were A-B choices gave Remedy some more control in the situation. It's already expensive to create a video game, but also recording hundreds and hundreds of different video outcomes and filmed television segments for hundreds of options would have been impossible, especially if you didn't know it was going to be, you don't know it's going to be successful. The game is also really short, and it's maybe 10 hours long, including the television episodes. There's a lot of action in the 5 chapters, but the problem becomes that there is not enough time to untangle the complicated plot, and it feels plot-holed and confusing. And because there's so much action rather than exposition explaining the story, there's also not enough time to relate to the characters you're playing. Arguably, without a strong narrative, then the point of the television episodes and the live action segments are more redundant because they are solely narrative focused. Although I do think an element of action and interaction is important and it's good fun, I feel that there was too much and not enough story within the game segments to help the pacing of the game and also an understanding of the game. It is very complicated. However, I've seen some arguments that the action-packed game segments contrast purposely with the television episodes, which allows for character development in more dedicated narrative pieces. However, I would say, and this is personal opinion here, that there is some magic in playing a character and controlling them comparative to just watching them. Gamers take ownership of the character's actions, and even if that's an illusion, it makes you more immersed in the story, at least in my opinion. On a positive note, the writing certainly has very interesting ideas and concepts intertwined in the narrative that keeps the players engaged. Despite plot holes and occasional lack of clarity, the audience does manage to keep a grasp on what's happening, and that means it's tolerable. I wouldn't say that the plot is any more complicated than something like Orphan Black, the TV show, and it has similar plot difficulties, but it's still put together well enough that you are pulled into that science fiction universe and we're able to suspend our disbelief. In fact, I would say the most positive reception this game received all reflects on the story. They say that the narrative is the best part of the game. In fact, even more recent reviews of this game talk about the narrative and not much else. So that is one of the reasons I didn't want to spoil this for you, because it is worth experiencing on your own. The Steam reviews for this game are incredibly positive. The consensus is that the story is good. The only negative things people mention in these reviews is the television episodes. As I was saying, these episodes act as filling in the blanks of the story that were less clear in the game parts where the action has kicked in. It was described at the time as kind of B-movie TV. It's a kind of thing that if it was on TV, you'd probably watch it. if you were binge watching something. So it's a bit like, you know, like a Vampire Diaries or something like that. You have it on the background. It's not highbrow, it's not anything like that, but it's still well made enough that you'd watch it. A lot of people also said that despite it being a television episode, they were just essentially long cutscenes. When we look at video games, apart from perhaps looking at Metal Gear Solid, we don't often have 20-minute cutscenes. Yes, people love to watch television, but when people sit down to play a video game, there is a prerequisite that there is at least some kind of interactivity between the player and the narrative. Even if it's just walking around in some kind of walking simulator, you still get to press WASD. On a personal level, when I was playing this game, I struggled with the television episodes because I found myself getting bored, especially because it's not really affecting the game in any meaningful way, which makes it feel a bit arbitrary and unnecessary. There's precisely no reason why all of these things we see in the show could not be incorporated into the game. On a more positive note, the episodes were very well made, very professional, well filmed, and by the most part well acted. They allowed for all the characters to be fleshed out, particularly the antagonist. There's a heavy focus in the television episodes on your antagonist compared to the protagonist, which allows you to create a very well-rounded character and kind of allows you to develop your own opinion on what's going on in the events and why people are acting certain ways. Alternatively, it could also be argued that the television segments allowed for a break from the combat, and this would prevent combat fatigue in players. The attention to detail in the episodes is also very rewarding for a completionist player who finds all the collectibles and then they are reflected in the live action sequences. And this also encourages players to explore once they realise that their collectible findings have some impact. I want to talk about the shooting segments briefly. They are a bit repetitive, but the game is actually pretty fun in terms of the action segments, and I really like the use of time-bending powers, and that was generally well received. Again, the only real issue with this is it's a little bit repetitive and also with the frame rate of the game, especially if you're on console. There were also a few platforming and puzzle segments, and these were really unusual because the movement of the characters is really quite sluggish and it's not designed for platforming. It feels a little bit strange. Someone else described it as wading through syrup. I do think it was a nice idea to provide some change from the shooting elements, but I don't feel like the game is long enough to justify these sections. I feel like it would have been more worthwhile to have put in these puzzling segments if the game was longer, but at the moment it just kind of feels like padding and it felt a little bit unnecessary. So that's all I have to say really on both my reception and the public's reception of the game, and we're going to go into the conclusion, which is definitely my more personal thoughts on the game and also whether or not the multimedia aspect of it worked. I think my conclusion of this game is slightly differing from the general consensus. The public, as far as it seems, like this game. I think on a scale of video games, this sits somewhere in the mediocre area for me. Firstly, my thoughts are that this game is not worth the price tag. It's a lot of money for a 10-hour game. Even if you play it through twice, you're still really not getting that great value for money. This game is short because of the TV episodes. I speculate due to budget constraints on them. But I think if the information the episodes gave us were included in the game segments in narrative form or with exposition, and the TV element was cut altogether, the game could have likely been expanded on in terms of playtime. I suspect a game without the television episodes would have been more successful and would have likely expressed the story with more clarity. I also think without the episodes, the narrative would have been less complicated, as they would not have had to compensate for the idea of using multimedia. So I understand why the game is short, why it was that way, but it doesn't make it acceptable to me. As the general public say, the game itself is alright, it's fun, it's pretty, it has a cool concept, the writing is good, but I find the TV show element is ignored in that reception of the game by most on Steam. For the sake of this review, I'm going to speak as though the TV show is integral to the game itself and part of it as a whole, rather than something you can skip and miss. I'm all for innovation, in fact I encourage it, but I feel like the game was damaged by the idea of a transmedia experience. To put it simply, Quantum Break was written around the transmedia idea, rather than the transmedia idea being implemented to work with the story. And because the story was the secondary focus, it caused a jarring lack of narrative security and many plot holes. This is similar, in my opinion, to how Cyberpunk 2077 changed its narrative to work around Keanu Reeves instead of having a story and then putting him in it. It just doesn't work as well. Although it can get a lot of flack, I'm a sucker for a David Cage style game, which is essentially a long interactive movie in the form of a game. And I feel that Quantum Break would have benefited for taking some more inspiration from games like Heavy Rain or even the Lacklustre Beyond Two Souls. Just in the sense that those games prove that you can make a cinematic television show or film style experience within a game, but it allows for it to all be in one medium and thus keep the player within the experience. The fact that it can be done this way and has been done this way further heightens the redundancy of the live action episodes. The idea here is good generally, but with this story and this narrative and with the choices they made, specifically in making the TV show entirely redundant to the game, was a poor choice. What I think would have worked better is by making the TV show something that could not have been replicated within the game itself, or alternatively and likely more easily, make the game something that could have not been performed as live action. It's a challenging idea overall, and transmedia is challenging. I would not be able to do it myself, so I'm not going to sit here and say that I could. And I think it would have been hard to make it not jarring in any circumstance. But I think when we look at this, Quantum Break still feels jarring despite them being so close in appearance. I'm not going to write off integrating different medias into each other. I just don't think that this was the right way to do it here. It doesn't work as it should and actually ended up being a detriment of the game. In most opinions I've seen, it's noted as the worst part of it. The one thing that irks me the most, actually, is the half-hearted commitment to genre. I think it's petty of me, but if you promise me decision-making or choice-making narratives, I expect something like Heavy Rain or maybe even a BioWare experience with Mass Effect, or even Detroit Become Human. I expect more choices, even if it's just an illusion. If you're going to include puzzle segments, I also expect you to commit with that and make your physics system work with that more intuitively and not just sporadically randomly place it. Anyway, that's just me nitpicking. The game is beautiful. You can feel that each level has been carefully designed. I can feel the actors' experience and passion for the project through the screen. And I can see the money that's gone into it. And you can definitely see that in the television episodes, which they match the game so closely in production. And the value of production is so satisfyingly. It's really well made. But would I recommend this? Yes, when it's on sale. I feel like witnessing an attempt at innovation is always exciting, and I also think it allows for people to form their own exciting opinions and start developing their own ideas too. It's a good time, it's a good game, and I describe it overall as a success as a game in general, but I don't think they were successful with incorporating transmedia into it. It's a good game, but a bad TV show. I think if no one makes these mistakes, then we'll never learn, and I think we can see from this that this was not the right way to incorporate two medias together in this form, and that's my opinion. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'm not sure if this video made much sense. I feel like I said it differently because it definitely felt like I was reading you an essay rather than just speaking to the camera, where I kind of make more things up, but I was really interested in just speaking to you and kind of formulating my ideas into more coherent sentences if possible. So let me know if you preferred this style of video. Let me know if there are any games you want me to review. I'm more than happy to do that. In future, I think I'll probably include a plot summary and also some spoilers, but I'll include that in a section where it's clearly marked as full of spoilers. For this one, it didn't feel necessary. I wanted it to be slightly shorter if possible. Who knows if it's going to end up being shorter. Anyway, thank you for listening if you've got this far through, and please hit subscribe if you're interested in seeing more.
I'm the bad guy, make your mama sad guy, make your girlfriend mad tight, make your my seducer dad type. Yeah, I'm the bad guy, duh.